This is day 2 in Davos, and usually the place where I am standing, which is by the side of the promenade, would be in about waist deep snow or maybe at least it's knee deep snow. Not the case this year, because this year, for the first time, the Davos World Economic Forum is taking place in the summer. That's because 2 winter slots were lost because of COVID. Nevertheless, last couple of days have been warm, but today is particularly cold and there is a stiff breeze. So let me see if I last out with this session of Cut The Clutter, which I am bravely trying to record from here, all by myself. For all the imperfections, I am the one to blame, because I am doing it purely in a strength of one, on a do-it-yourself basis. And you know what happens as we grow senior? One of the curses of seniority is that you get spoiled. You get spoiled by colleagues who pamper you, who fix everything for you. So right now, I am by myself. And let me tell you, this Davos, I've been coming in for almost 30 years now. This Davos is among the most geopolitical in its content and emphasis that we have seen so far. 2001, 9/11, it was geopolitical, but it did not involve major powers on contrary sides, on opposite sides. Major powers were all on the same side. So it wasn't geopolitical in that sense. Maybe 89, 90, around the end of the Cold War, maybe it might have been, but then this was very small. This wasn't such a big phenomenon. And certainly I wasn't here. So right now you can see the context. It's Ukraine, it's Russia, it's America plus Europe versus Russia and China. So China sort of, the shadow of China is everywhere. So what we are doing is, while I am here, and I listen to a bit more, we come here to listen, to understand, to learn from much smarter people of all walks of life. I will talk about the geopolitics in a day or two, maybe tomorrow, maybe the day after. Meanwhile, I've also discovered something else has caught my eye, and this is something very significant. This is a research study that has been conducted by Central European Institute of Asian Studies. This just popped up in this place yesterday. And this is a study that they have conducted between March 9th and 23rd. That is just a couple of months back as we speak. Between March 9th and 23rd in China, on attitudes that the Chinese have towards the world, particularly the major powers of consequence to them. And the findings of this are quite startling, and we Indians should take note of it. Because let me start it with a basic question. Do we Indians want to be loved by the Chinese? Who doesn't want to be loved by everybody? But also, it will be quite safe for us to conclude that at this moment, Chinese don't particularly have any reason to love us, because we've had lots of tensions. Rhetoric on the two sides has been quite nasty. And yet, to see the kind of negativity there is about India in China is quite startling. So let me, first of all, I will run through some basic details and some headline points, and then go into a few more details and a few more sort of granular analysis as we go along. Now, what did this research do? How was it conducted? I told you it was between March 9 and 23. The reason those dates were chosen and this research was also done was, by this time, the Russian invasion of Ukraine was well and truly on. So the larger purpose of this research was also to see where Chinese opinion, public opinion stands vis-a-vis the Russian invasion of Ukraine and the position Xi Jinping's China has taken on it. So the people interviewed in this case was between the age group of 18 to 65, so all adults, and they were asked about their attitudes on 25 countries, 25 important countries of the world, and to rank them on a scale of 0 to 100. And then you can see as these charts run, we are taking these charts by the courtesy of Central European Institute of Asian Studies. It's their study, a 31-page study, of which I'm sharing the entire link with you. Please see it very carefully. It's quite startling and quite fascinating. So 25 countries rate on 0 to 100. Obviously 100 is fantastic. 0 is, I can't stand that country. Now see where various countries featured there. Now, how many people like Russia? Now, when you say like, there are people who find it very good, and then there are neutral. So let's yellow in all these maps is neutral, all these charts, so leave out the yellow. So see the shades on the blue side, right? Those are good guys. So on Russia, 79.8%. That is almost 80% Chinese say that they like Russia. Only 12% say the Russians are bad guys, I don't like them. 80% say that their view of Russia has improved in the past 3 years. 80%. Now, past 3 years is when Putin has been ratcheting up his confrontation with the West, or you can be on the other side and you can say during the period then when the West has been ratcheting up its confrontation with Putin. So 80% say that their attitudes have improved. Between 2008 and 2015, the Chinese say that their attitudes towards Russia have improved. That is in 7 years. They say Putin has trust, Putin has guts. Those are the lines coming from these respondents. Putin has trust, Putin has guts. There is brotherly love, and there is brotherly love between China and Russia, and also enemy's enemy is a friend. Now, that is all understandable because, as we can see right now, Russia is sort of isolated. The US and NATO are on one side and they are driving the rest of the world to be on that side. A large number of nations in the UN General Assembly voted on the resolution that Russia sees as hostile, and on which India and China were among countries that abstained. So this you can understand. You can also understand negative view on the US. On the US, 60% Chinese say that they have a negative view, quite a negative view. 60%, 31% say they have a positive view. What is surprising is country in the second slot after the US. And you may have guessed by now that country is India, that country is us. So 60% Chinese say they dislike, they find America bad. 58% say they find India bad. While in America's case, 31% say that they have a positive view of America. In India's case, it's only about 25%. So that is quite an eye opener in India's case. Now, if you look at America, you can also see there's a chart from the report which you will see on my screen that tells you the kind of words that come to people's minds, Chinese people's minds, when they talk about America. So the most prominent word that you see, the word that Chinese people use most often about America is hegemon. Then there is bossy, selfish, shameless, retarded, vicious, initiator of wars. There is also somewhere Statue of Liberty. So you can see it, but at the same time, there is appreciation, strong armed forces, strong economy, etc., etc., etc. Once again, which is the country that the Chinese like the most? So I know that these are not as much of a surprise as they might have been, but the country the Chinese like the most by far is Russia. In Pakistan, just after that, this is like 75% to 73%. They are top of the pops. And then you will see that pattern repeat elsewhere. Again, that's a little bit predictable. Important thing is then you see the next bunch of charts that tell you how Chinese attitudes have changed over the past 3 years about three important countries. I'm sure they have this data for others also that will be released in the course of time. As the institute says, this is only the first report and more data will come. So you can see the attitudes or their view of the US and Japan has worsened a great deal in the last 3 years. With Russia, it's improved. Then we move on a bit. If you look at how the Chinese think the world sees them, how do these countries that they are rating, that they are giving their view on, how do they look at China? So again, this graphic is almost like a mirror image of the first one, which is that the country I dislike the most, I also presume that country dislikes me the most. So US, top of the non-pops, India second, then Japan, then Australia. So all of the quad is there. So all of the quad doesn't like me. That's very, very important. Again, come to another figure, and we are talking only headlines right now. We are not getting into minutiae of this research. That's too complex and will take too long. And by that time, my hands will froze. And also, I'm getting a little bit of the drizzle. Next figure tells you cultural values. How similar are this country's cultural values to mine? That is, how similar are India's or America's cultural values to China's? So once again, on this figure, the worst is the US. The US cultural values are farthest from mine, and India is the second worst. So again, no difference. Then, as we go ahead, India begins to beat America on the downside. So see this figure. If there was no pandemic, which is the country you are most likely to visit? So the country that the Chinese say they are least likely to visit if there was no pandemic, that means as tourists, it is India. It is not America, it is India. India beats America there. So 75% of the Chinese say that if even if there was no pandemic, one country I don't want to go to is India. And there US comes third, which is a surprise. And other countries, as usual, you can see on the chart, do much better than India. And some of that is predictable, but the important point is that India in this case is the worst, Vietnam is second worst, America is third worst, and then come the rest. Then come to the next point, and again very important. If I visit that country, if I'm a Chinese and I visit these countries, where will I find that the local people are least friendly to me? Least friendly. Once again, India is on top of the bad guys. So Chinese think that of all these countries, the country where they will find most unfriendly local people is in India. Once again, important. US is second, and don't worry, Australia and Japan are close by there. So once again, it's also a quad issue. Then you come to the next point, vaccines. If I have to take COVID vaccines, which countries' COVID vaccines will I take? And again, these are countries including EU which manufacture vaccines, US, EU, and India. So the country from which the Chinese least want their vaccines, they least want made in India vaccines, right? So once again, India is by far on the top on the vaccine front also, which is quite surprising given that bulk of the vaccines that India makes are actually vaccines developed, invented by Oxford University, and that is the most used vaccine in the world, what we call as Covishield. But the Chinese say that under no circumstances they want Indian vaccines. They love Chinese vaccines, which is a little bit counterintuitive, in fact, more than counterintuitive, because in all trials beforehand, this Chinese vaccine Sinovac was only found 50-60% effective. And if the vaccine was so effective, all of China would not be locked down now. And now, not looking at a full opening until after next spring, until after 2023 spring. And that is what we hear from a lot of senior people from China now. So if everybody got vaccinated in China, and if their vaccine is so hot, then how come they are suffering this? But the fact is, because they dislike India so much, they distrust Indian vaccines most of all. Then, which country is most economically powerful? So rate them on their economic power. Once again, the weakest in their view is India. Weakest in their view is India, and then surprisingly, Russia. So they see Russia as the second weakest, which is a touch of realism. Otherwise, they go constantly by their strategic view in terms of what suits them geostrategically and politically for China. But in this case, they do count Russia as the second worst. Then military power. Once again, which is the weakest military power? India. Weakest economic power? India. Least attractive culture? India. Most unfriendly people? India. The vaccines I'm likely to use least of all made in India. So militarily also India. Then once again, cultures. Which culture is most likely to have influence over my country? That is China in this case. You ask a Chinese, which culture is least likely or most likely to influence you? The culture least likely to influence them, they say, is Indian. So that should put into perspective all these Amir Khan, Salman Khan type movies which become big hits in China. So do they see those as cultural influence? Do they just see those as entertainment? Is our soft power so lacking in China? It's an important point. Or maybe they are just paying a compliment back to us for completely ruining their Chinese cuisine. I am joking because maybe our retaliation to all this is Gobi Manchurian. There's one more graphic that you will see. The Chinese people were asked, what should your country's foreign policy be towards these countries? So the country against which they want their foreign policy to be toughest is the US, then Japan, then India. Again, we are all the bad guys. The Quad is there, but at least India is not on top of this one. But we also have to see what are the things that the Chinese say when they speak well of Putin or well of Russia. What is it that they like about Russia? So they say Russians are warrior people, Putin is a fighter, they are brave people, they are enemies of enemies. And also if you see this word cloud kind of thing there from the study, the words they use most of all about Russia. Warriors, yes, but you also see other things popping up there. Vodka, beautiful girls. So you can again see that this is coming maybe from their view of the Russian cultural influence. So once again, we don't have to agree with any of this, but it's very important to listen to your friends. It's much more important than that to listen to what your adversaries are saying or what those who are hostile to you are saying. Because there's one more graphic, and you will see it now, which says how influential are these countries economically for you. And there also, India is at the bottom, which is very surprising given that China has just completed a year with an 80 billion trade surplus. That's more than our defense budget, a couple of $1 billion more than our entire defense budget. They are still not satisfied and they are still saying that India does not matter for our economy. So this is the familiar old story of there being scars on our minds. I suspect if you held research like this about China, you will find something very similar on the Indian minds also about China. So if at all this relationship has to get better, then the two countries have to work very hard at it. And second, the Chinese have to stop looking at India purely through the prism of the Quad. So once again, as I had mentioned to you early on, as things unfold here, as we listen to more, as we learn more, I will talk more on the larger geopolitical picture, because this is the most geopolitical Davos that I've been to, and hopefully when we do it tomorrow, I will still be able to do it outdoors and it won't be raining. Today the rain sort of let me down and you can see the state of my notes at this point.